Buenas noches.
Ya, muy buenas noches. Ahora sí, antes de empezar con nuestra primera web conference del curso, quisiera conocerles. Creo que a Ever ya tuve la oportunidad de tenerlo en una clase anterior. No recuerdo si con Paola tuve clase anteriormente o no. Mi nombre es Viviana Andrea Ospina. Voy a estarles acompañando en este curso y soy profesora hace 17 años. Estudié en la UNAD y también terminé la maestría que ustedes están cursando en este momento. En este momento soy estudiante de doctorado en educación y llevo con la UNAD desde el 2019 trabajando. Ahora pues estoy la mayor parte del tiempo que tengo en la UNAD con la maestría. Entonces quisiera escucharlos. Que te presentes, Paola, conocerte, a qué te dedicas, dónde vives y demás.
Sí, señora, mucho gusto. Bueno, pues yo me llamo Paola, soy profe también hace más o menos unos 20 años, profe universitaria. Soy licenciada en Español y Lenguas de la Pedagógica. Tengo una maestría en Filosofía Latinoamericana en la Universidad de Santo Tomás. Soy profe del programa de Comunicación Social Periodismo de Uniminuto Calle 80. Y recientemente comencé a trabajar también como tutora unas horas en la UNAD para la licenciatura en inglés. ¿Qué más puedo decir? Pues nada, como casi toda mi experiencia reciente como profe está en el marco de el fortalecimiento de la lengua extranjera, pero a través del currículo, con metodologías como EMI, COIL y otras que no están concentradas en la enseñanza explícita de la lengua, sino en la lengua como una mediación para la enseñanza de otros oficios, saberes, etcétera. Eso es como a grandes rasgos lo que hago. Entonces, en el programa de comunicación social, pues hemos creado con los y las profes, estudiantes, practicantes, con un montón de gente, una comunidad de práctica en donde estamos creando y piloteando una ruta de fortalecimiento del inglés, en la que trabajamos en realidad es formación, no sé cómo decir eso, alfabetización mediática y formación de los y las futuras periodistas alrededor de una ruta de combate, fighting disinformation, bueno, combate de la desinformación.
Ok,
Eso, pues.
ok. Thank you,
Yes.
thank you.
Okay,
Bien.
you're welcome.
Ever, ¿me estás escuchando? Can you hear me?
Sí, señora.
Ok, bienvenido, Ever. Bueno, I'm going to start my presentation now and I'll share my screen with you so that we can go over a few things that we need to look into, facing this new activity that we are working on and that we are about to turn in a few days. So hang on one second. Okay. So you please let me know if you can see my screen. Yeah.
No, está la pantalla como en blanco. Pareciera como si estuviera compartiendo, pero no se ve nada. Ahora sí ya apareció.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so this is phase 2, epistemic conceptualization, based on what we are going to work on during these assessment processes in language mediation and learning for our particular course. And what I would like to start with, let me move this out of the way. What I would like to start with is looking into our course. Our course, we are going to approach, different strategies that can give us a broader spectrum and take us closer to, different aspects on how people learn languages and how evaluation and assessment takes place. We are going to talk about complex thinking, also, living processes of nature, and we will create a more open an activity and a program activities to assess language learning processes. So when we are going to, as we move forward on the course, we are going to see assessment as moving, always rotating around the students and the things that we need to focus on. So how do we see assessment from our particular course? So when we look at assessment here, we look at it as a cyclical network. We are all interconnected, and the main goal is to help this language learning process. Fortunately, we have assessment as one of these techniques or strategy to be able to check how this process is being going on with the students or the learners themselves. So we are going to look at assessment not as a fragmented process with different stages, but rather we are going to try and look at it from a complex whole. When the teacher, in our case, for our master's program, we are called mediators, and we look to find the road on how to learn through evaluation. So another thing that I would like to invite you to is to think about these transformations that are required within the society nowadays, so that the knowledge is perceived and the evaluation of said knowledge is perceived as constant, vital, and limitless. That's why we talk about a cyclical network that is interconnected to help language learning processes. So keep in mind that we are going to look at assessment as a constant process, also a vital one, as well as limitless. So when we face our course, we have 3 different learning outcomes. For this first one, learning outcome number 1, we have to analyze one's own evaluation practices in the field of ELT by considering current theoretical principles, methodologies, and conceptions of assessment, as well as acknowledging complexity theory as a new approach to assess learning language education. So this one right here is learning outcome number 1, which we are going to work on during this phase 2 that we're working on, and is the goal that is going to guide not only our activity, but also the process that we are going to take in. So we are going to start looking at traditional assessment. And for many years, assessment was a final judgment. The students were evaluated, and most of the time, for many, many years, only the numbers were taken into consideration. So learning came down to a score, and this approach can stifle the very curiosity. And so when our student, our learner, is hanging by a thread, only waiting for a grade, really the learning process, which is the final goal, we need our students to learn. That is our goal as mediators. If a student is not learning, then we are not doing our correct job. So quoting Albert Einstein, I really liked this quote for this particular unit that we're working on. And quote, "It is nothing short of a miracle that modern methods of teaching have not yet entirely strangled that sacred spirit of curiosity and inquiry. For this delicate plant seed needs freedom no less than stimulation." So before I go on, I would like to listen to you and your take on assessment. What is your take on assessment after we went through the first phase and you guys wrote your reflections and answered the questions? What do you think about assessment? What is your take on traditional assessment versus more modern assessment? Do you have any opinions, comments? Sorry.
Well, my main conclusion after reflecting on the first task, the first assignment, is that it's very difficult to conciliate between regulations and a more pedagogical way to understand assessment, especially in foreign languages, because the standards have become like the center, and the standardized evaluation has become the goal. So assessment is not being used as a way to learn, but as a way to get a job, to get classified for educational programs, to get access to opportunities. And then I think, well, we know that ethically, anytime that the means becomes the goal, well, there is a problem, because that's absolutely, I don't know how to say that. It's because my brain is not working at this time. I'm gonna switch to Spanish if it's possible, but
Yeah, no problem. Go ahead.
creo que es pues maquiavélico, precisamente.
Sí.
Lo que la famosa frase de que el fin justifica los medios, y de que pues en esa medida, cuando los medios se vuelven el fin, pues éticamente estamos muy perdidos. And in language teaching and learning, it's been a while since people are studying languages, not for learning, not for getting to know the cultures, to travel, to think the world, but most of people are just trying to comply with all the requirements that the market is requiring them.
Right. So a lot of people have lost the taste for language learning. And now with assessment, comes stress. Every time a student is being evaluated, he will be stressed. And sometimes if they don't perform well, then some of them give up. So this really assessment just for the sake of evaluating is not really what we need right now. So we are going to try and look at it from another perspective, facing it so that when we go into our classrooms, when we go working with our students, we can also switch, the flick and try and start this new process that little by little has been going on, especially in our country, given that we are very constrained by laws and the Ministry of Education. So right now, when we look at traditional assessment versus integrated assessment, which is what is being looked at right now more and more so. So traditional skills assessment, historically, this method was just testing, right? When we have a student and we need to evaluate him, reading, writing, speaking, listening, and a test is isolated. They need to be examined in every single skill in an isolated manner. So, and this approach has been argued a lot by some authors, which they think that this doesn't really reflect how people use language in the real world. In the real world, we do not use language in isolated skills. We use it integrated. So for example, a traditional test might have, separate sections for reading. And if we think about, the many certification tests that we probably have taken in the past, or some that our students take at the university, these tests are separated by sections. They need to write an essay, they need to listen, and they need to speak, or they need to read and inform, and then they need to answer ABC questions. All of these is traditional skills assessment, whereas now we are trying to integrate these skills assessment. So when we are trying to assess by integrating skills, we need to design tasks that require students to use multiple language skills altogether. That's where the challenge comes. That's when the mediator needs to really think about not his needs per se, but the student's needs. What does my student need in order for him or her to be competent in the language, but also to give them a hand as to how will he or she use the language in the real world. So this type of assessment, is reflecting the complexity of genuine communication. When we have genuine communication, we don't prepare, we don't read, we don't look at pictures and describe. These separate assessment abilities will take the student into looking at language as a subject, which needs to be passed or needs to be averaged in so and so level of English according to the European framework. However, we need to look at English learning in our case, or foreign languages, as an ability for life. So when we change, or when we switch a little bit our mind and start looking at assessment as a strategy to improve the learning process, and we integrate skills, we will be able to help our students comply with also the needs they want. So for these phases that we're working on, specifically, we are going to focus on key areas. And the first key area that we are going to focus on is types of assessment. So understanding that there are various assessment types, including language testing and classroom-based assessment. We will look into the different references that we will find different or various assessment types. Which of those are appropriate for my classroom, for my students? That is up to me to decide ethically. And that's when the ethical considerations come into hand, because we need to be exploring these conceptions, the ethical principles that guide evaluators. We need to evaluate, we need to assess. That is true. That is not going to disappear. Unfortunately, evaluations coexist with the teaching learning process. So we need to just try and look at it from another angle. Switch our glasses and look at it from another angle so we can be ethical, not only with the practice itself as a professor, but also with our students, keeping in mind that they need the language to communicate, not only to approve a test. Then another key area is complexity theory. We are going to introduce complexity theory, and this is a contemporary approach to learning, teaching, and assessment. I will explain a little bit later on in the presentation. So these key areas we are going to look into while you guys read the different references that there are to read. If you looked at the guide, there are different readings that are recommended, but also if you look at the syllabus, you are going to find another set of readings that you need to be able to understand this topic as well. So we are going to look into this new paradigm, look into 3 different pillars of modern assessment. We already talked about traditional assessment. So we are now going to situate ourselves into this new paradigm. This new paradigm, which is based on 3 different pillars. And the first one is formative assessment. Formative assessment it's an ongoing process that is being done for a while now through observation and students' participation. So it provides continuous feedback. If we don't give feedback to our students, then there is no formative assessment going on. Yes, I know that sometimes giving feedback and monitoring our students is not as possible or as really you are not as able to do it as much as you'd like to, but we do need to give this feedback. This feedback helps the students reflect upon what they did, adapt so that they can improve. So when I am doing formative assessment, the learner is going to understand it as, okay, I did a task, I did something inappropriate, or maybe I'm missing something, so I need to adapt myself to that. And then it will be, a ground for him to improve. And the learning process will improve as he goes. And the formative assessment is also a cycle. So I assess my student, I give or provide feedback, student reflects, adapts, and improves, and so forth and so on. Another thing that we are going to look at, the second pillar, is metacognition. And what we want our students to do is to think about their thinking. How do I learn? Why do I need to learn this particular thing, and what for? So we are going to empower our students so they can think about how they are learning, how they are acquiring language. Assessment should build self-regulation and critical reflection. When you do a critical reflection, you are able to know what you're doing right and where you are making a little mistake and where you are missing information, or exactly in which area I may need to improve. So this gives students agency and it keeps them active in their own educational path. We need to empower our students to not only reflect on what they're doing wrong, but also reflect on what they're doing right. Because what they're doing right will help them to move forward in the educational process. So if they self-regulate, they are analyzing, the learner is analyzing what went on, why he didn't learn, or why did he learn. So then he will start reflecting upon his own strategies of learning. The student goes home, or if he's online, he will do his own process. So empowering our students will give them the opportunity to get that metacognition moving in their head so that their learning process, it's better, that it will improve and it will really mean something for them. Finally, we are going to talk about complexity theory and making sure that we understand that learning is not a linear path, but it's dynamic. And like I said at the beginning, it's an interconnected system. Assessment must be flexible and context aware. We are now in a world where we have many different types of students, many different needs from our students. So we need to adapt our assessment to be flexible so that our students can have their outcomes properly and that it will be in a positive way. Sometimes we are going to learn how to value this process rather than just aim for the goal. So my aim is to get a 5. That's my goal. That's what I want. Very different if I think it, if my goal is to be able to communicate at the airport when I go and try and do my check-in, and I will be understanding, face to face with this person who is trying to help me, and I am able to make myself understood. So language is what is used what is language used for nowadays? Language is used nowadays to communicate, to converse, and to do many, many things. But in the classroom, our student is looking at it as a subject. So if we try and change this linear path that our students are coming into, because I understand it's difficult to change a set of mind when our students are raised in schools learning that the best thing, the most important thing for them is to get an approving grade. If they approve, then that's it, they're safe. We need to try and use assessment as an motivational strategy so that the students can be reflective, they can be empowered to use their own thinking and use their own strategies to continue on their learning journey. So when we talk about traditional versus formative assessment, so the traditional assessment, we have, maybe we went to school here in Colombia or maybe in another country, and traditional assessment has always been the same thing. You learn something, they give you an exam, you get a grade, and that's that. So historically, assessment was seen as a final, let's say when you do a bullseye and you throw, a little dart, and that was the goal. The goal was to score, right? To get a passing score. Evaluation to determine a student's achievement was marked and is still marked by numbers. Oh, this student is a 3, this student is a 4, or no, this student is a 1.5. So that right there, instead of motivating students to learn, what it does is it destroys their intention to learn. Because if I constantly get a bad grade and I got an assessment, I got an evaluation today, and I got a 3, and next week I get a 3.5, I'm still in the basic range of evaluation according to our schools here in Colombia, but our student has moved quite a lot. So how do we change that and not focus on the weaknesses, but focus on their strengths? In contrast, formative assessment is a metacognitive strategy that occurs throughout the learning process. It's not just for the student, but it's also for us as teachers, as professors, so that we can reflect in the teaching process as well. Is my methodology working? Am I giving my students everything that they need to achieve their learning goals? So when we do formative assessment, we're not only looking at the students' needs, but we're also putting ourselves up front and looking into our methodologies so that we can help the students hand by hand to achieve this goal they have through the learning process. So the idea is to help our students to think about how they can learn and to motivate them to improve. So this approach, like I said before, it promotes self-regulation and reflection. Our students need feedback. They need to talk to their teachers. They need to know what they're doing right and what they're not doing so great. That is the only way our students will understand what's going on and they will start self-regulating. It's a process that we need to start, but the invitation is to do so, to try and facilitate the feedback with our students so they can be more motivated towards learning. Okay, so when we talk about the metacognitive, did it change? Okay. So formative assessment acts as a metacognitive strategy, guiding students through a reflective loop. Okay, so we are going to, let me use this. Maybe we can see it better. So first, our students get to evaluate the task. So they understand the goals and the criteria. So it's important that our students always know what it is that they are going to be doing and what is expected of them. Number two, evaluate strengths and weaknesses. Identify those personal knowledge gaps. If a student knows exactly what's going on, he might be able to understand better what he's missing and will try to improve in those particular gaps. As a third step of this loop, they plan or strategize on how they are going to tackle this. How am I going to do it so that I can understand it better? When I'm inviting my student to use his metacognitive skills, I'm asking him to look for ways so that he can improve his learning process. And after he applies these strategies that he thought about, they need to be monitored to see if this plan is working. And finally, reflect, adapt, and the loop starts all over again, right? So the role of metacognition is crucial in this process because it's essential that the student can self-criticize, be critical on how he's learning, and adapt their thinking to improve. So formative assessment, when we use it as a metacognitive strategy, helps the student or empowers the student to be active and to take this role in his own learning process, right? So this 5-step process: evaluate the task, evaluate the strengths and weaknesses, plan the approach, apply strategies and monitor, and reflect and adapt, will help our students to be able to build autonomy and a deeper understanding of whatever it is that I'm trying to have him learn. In this particular case, we are working on a language acquisition, right? This learning process. So when we talk about complexity theory, when we talk about this theory, it's always challenging these traditional views from the past on assessment in particular. Before, we used to talk about evaluation, and a lot of teachers some years back thought that evaluation was a quiz, a test, or a presentation or a debate. And so they thought that that was it. And it views that learning is a dynamic system where the students and the teachers are continuously adapting and evolving. So we, as teachers, also have a prime role in this assessment idea with the complexity theory. So the key idea here is instead of a fixed, predictable process, which we can think of, okay, today we are going to read, so you have a reading test, and then we have, we're gonna watch a video, and you are going to complete the sentences, or whatever the typical things that we most of us have done. We need to try and see it as a cyclical network. where the evaluation is constant and is interconnected within the different stages. So we don't only see the evaluation process as one test, 3 tests. No, the formative assessment is constant, like I said, and the key idea with complexity theory is that is continuously adapting, evolving, not only the student, but also the professor. And this cyclical network will take the student to interconnect what he is learning and how he can improve it. So a practical application, maybe this moves beyond predetermined outcomes, but encourages teachers to be a little bit more flexible, open-ended activities that allow for meaningful results, contextualized learning, and so that we don't have this interference with the rigidity of just standardized measures. I understand, and we understand that we live in a country, we teach in a country where we have standardized tests and we have standardized methodologies. However, we can start changing that by using formative assessment, by allowing our students to become active and own their learning process and improve students' agency. Just give them the ball, because we've been teaching and we've been evaluating from our side, but we haven't been giving the responsibility to the students. So that's another thing that we need to think of. This flexibility allows for the student to take more responsibility of his process, so that he can also be aware of how things are happening. Oh, sorry. So I would like to finish up by looking at complexity theory and the holistic view of assessment. When we look at this holistic view of assessment, we move from a linear model of education, cause and effect, and instead we are going to look at it as a dynamic, unpredictable, and interconnected process. Everybody learns in a different way. Shouldn't everybody then be assessed in a different way? It's like we cannot assess the students all with a standardized test and expect them all to do the same, because they all have different learning processes. In this model, assessment isn't just a single isolated event. It's multifaceted, and the teacher acts as a mediator, guiding the students through this network of learning opportunities. When the student has agency of his learning process, he gets to choose how is he going to move through this network. But we, as mediators, need to be right there, giving feedback and telling him or her, hey, not this way, you need to come over, look at it this way, so that we can focus on the entire learning journey and not only in the final product. Our eyes need to shift from what you were mentioning now, the end. So all we need is to get a score of. We need to try and shift from there and look into the learning journey. Evaluation is seen as a vital part of the learning ecosystem, of course, but we need to make sure that it encourages collaboration and critical thinking. And so this perspective that we are proposing moves beyond just, the rubrics and checklists and predetermined outcomes. And so we invite you to embrace this craziness of human complexity. We are naturally messy. Humans, we don't all learn the same. We all take our time and we approach it in a different way. So the invitation with this first task is to try and look at it from another perspective. Look at assessment with a new pair of glasses. And so how can you take that with you and apply it inside your classroom? Okay. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing. There you go. Thank you very much. Do you guys have any questions regarding the task that we have at hand? Anything I can help you with? So if we look at the
No question.
Yeah, go ahead. Eve? No questions? Paola?
No question.
Okay, perfect. So if we look at the guide, remember that the due date is September 29th. If you have any questions, please, you can write me via Teams or you can write me an internal email. If you have any inconveniences with the references or anything like that, you can also let me know. I had a little bit of difficulty downloading one of them. So if you have difficulty, let me know and I will send them to you guys. I'm going to stop the recording. So for those of you who didn't attend the web conference and are watching the video, I hope that this information that we saw tonight was help to you. So I'm going to stop recording. Here you go.